The views and opinions expressed by the guests, callers, and hosts on this and all Rense Radio Network programs do not necessarily reflect or agree with those of the network, its commercial sponsors, its radio station affiliates, or internet broadcast platforms. In these controversial times, we believe the First Amendment and freedom of the press are absolutely essential to the survival of our nation. Thank you. And now, enjoy the program.
This tired planet of ours. A lot of trouble everywhere. Glad to have you on board tonight. We're going to look at some material this evening that has never been seen by the general public. Only a very few people, literally a handful of people in some cases, have been able to read this material over the years. It comes from the past, usually the best place to learn about the present and the future. Tonight, another conversation with William Mills Tompkins. Bill has been with us many times and is developing what is obviously an extraordinarily important development in disclosure about advanced propulsion technology. ET, UFO, ours, theirs, reptilians, Nordics. The whole idea is being able to move from point A to point B, whether it's in our solar system, whether it's intergalactic, whether it's a universe of travel. You've got to be able to get from A to B. Maybe you want to stop along the way and have some coffee, that's fine too. But the point is propulsion. That's the key. And what we're going to do tonight is talk to Bill Tompkins about things he knows, things he's experienced in his extraordinary lifetime, all about secret, advanced propulsion systems. And if you have looked at the home page, down in the top area near the bottom of the political arts section, you'll find there is a picture of deep space and some text. And the text, very important. It says, as I've been intimating, a world first, the above secret disclosure of advanced deep space propulsion systems. Remember what I said, it's all about propulsion. You've got to have a means of moving a spaceship, a spacecraft, from one point to another. The material is now posted. I have just posted it. Released for the first time ever, dozens of pages of documents never seen before pertaining to the most advanced U.S. space physics technology of their day and of our day. These documents go back to, the oldest one I've seen is relating to a book published by Dr. Oberth from 1929. The general time frame of these documents is 1950, 51 to 55. They come from Douglas Aircraft Corporation, which came to be known as McDonnell Douglas Missiles and Space. And what we're going to try to allow all of you to experience by putting these documents up, thanks to Bill Tompkins. I don't know where he got them, how he got them, that's his business, but they are essentially above top secret. No one was allowed to see these. These documents emanated from the ultra-secret black ops programs at Douglas Aircraft, where Bill Tompkins worked. These were compartmentalized, they were ultra-secret, and they dealt with, essentially, an awful lot of German scientific physics genius. That's where much of it came from. You'll see as you go through these documents. Look on that third piece of art at the top of the page where it says click here, and you can go to it right now if you'd like. There's plenty to read, and there will be more coming. But this is a story, again, about physics and about technology. And when you see where we were in, say, 1951, 52, and where others had been before that, you are going to be stunned. It is truly amazing. Ionic propulsion engines in 1950, and what Dr. Oberth was writing about in 1929. It's really amazing. Bill Tompkins, hello and welcome back.
Hey, I'm right here. Sounds good, Jeff. I think it's going to be an interesting evening for everybody.
I'm sure it will be, and I want to thank you very much for making this material available. It has never been seen before. It was the most secret of documentation, certainly in the early 1950s, in many respects, I think, of all. Fair statement?
Absolutely.
Now, you were there when all this happened, and if you've listened to the conversations between Bill and myself before, you'll understand about the Nordics and how they were clearly involved with Douglas Aircraft and these think tank black ops centers that were visited and worked in by Bill Tompkins. There are, again, so many things involved here. We won't get through all of it tonight, but it's up there now for you to take a look at and to just be fascinated by. Here's one little quick tidbit for you. This is from one of the pages, and it says, it's giving credit here, reproduced by J.W. Edwards, Edwards Brothers, Ann Arbor, Michigan, 1945, under license of Alien Property Custodian. What does that mean? Who was the alien property custodian, and what was the function of that individual or that group? And what other materials did they have under their authority? That's just one little tiny three-sentence, three-line tidbit from this documentation, and it just goes and goes and goes. I think the main thing that we have to keep in mind always when we talk to Bill is this really originates in the 1920s and 30s for the most part, and comes from Germany. This is German scientific genius, aided and abetted, if not ignited in some ways, by reptilian alien visitors who took a liking, for whatever reason, to Germans in Germany and were working with them, giving them knowledge, giving them data, and actually giving them hardware, discs, to use, to fly, and to copy. That's how the Germans got their disc program. And I think you've seen, hopefully many of you, if you haven't, go look on the right-hand side of the homepage down and find Bill Tompkins' featured story, and you'll see pictures, photos, dozens of them, they're all black and white pictures of German flying saucers from the 1930s and 40s. They're there. So where would you like to start, Bill?
Well, actually, I guess we should sort of say what the document's title actually is, because I think the title of this document is extremely interesting. It's called MTM 622. And then it says, Unconventional Propulsion Schemes. What in the world would that be?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my gosh. Part 2, 3155, Santa Monica Division, Douglas Aircraft Company, Incorporated. Wow. Okay. So what this is, it's like you've said, we're talking the 1950s, 51, 2, 3, and 4 time period. But much of the data that's in here actually occurred way before that.
Yeah.
And I think that what's most interesting about this document is that we had the vice president of engineering in Douglas who headed up a secret think tank inside of Douglas that all of the classified engineers didn't even know existed in Douglas. And at one time, there was roughly 200 of these people, which were studying, propulsion, space propulsion.
Uh-huh.
Now, as you go through this document, you're going to see that actually Elmer Wheaton, the vice president, and then his assistant, who was actually ahead of this program, were constantly talking to other people, primarily in Southern California, that were involved with, unconventional propulsion schemes. Now, nobody said anything about these being extraterrestrial, okay? And it's interesting that all of these different physicists, PhDs of the top level in Caltech, in UCLA, in the top technical organizations back east, were contacted by Elmer Wheaton, and they were interviewed to what their program actually was and looking at propulsion of space vehicles. Everybody knew that what we were doing was based on extraterrestrial information that the Germans had acquired, and actually before World War II, and were implementing production contracts to build a number of different types of extraterrestrial military vehicles. Wow. So when you look at this information, you're seeing that many organizations throughout the country are working on this. Different laboratories are working on it. And now remember that all of these same people, I would say 80% of the people that are listening in here that are not actually employed by Douglas, but were advisors to the secret think tank, had already gotten a package about extraterrestrial systems from Admiral Ricobata's information of his operatives that had brought back the information from Germany.
Which you attended the debriefing of, and you came to be the man who flew these packets of ultra-secret information to various think tanks and universities and others who were involved with the project. You were the man who spread the material around.
Yes, I was the disseminator of this data. And so here we are now, years later, because that was back in 42 or 42 and 43. Now we're 52 and 53, and we're in Douglas. And here we have all of these top-level specialists, the top technical people in your country working inside of a secret think tank.
Right.
And these people have all been previously given packages from Admiral Ricabada during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still struggling with definitions for how to design and build different propulsion systems for different space missions. And I think it's extremely interesting here that we got 10 years later or whatever, and we're still struggling. So what you're going to read for the papers that are available is their information and their approach, which is surprisingly different. Like you would think everybody would go with one particular approach.
Right, sure,
and
understand.
These fellows went with dozens and dozens of different ways to try to come up with a propulsion system that would carry personnel, military personnel, out into the galaxy to other stars, planets. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So what we really have then is detailed information, and surprisingly enough, not to be differing, being different with you, Jeff, yes, this information was the highest classification in the country. But when I delivered packages to the different universities and the naval research centers, not one piece of paper was actually stamped even confidential, let alone secret. Everybody knew it. Everybody knew what they were playing with.
Right.
Everybody understood what they were dealing with. And they operated as if the information was at the highest classification known in the country, even though some of the documents were not even classified confidential.
Well, that's a very interesting way to keep something out of the crosshairs of general intelligence, spies, and surveillance operations. It's not classified. Okay, so it tends to stay outside of the field of view. That was a very interesting way to classify something, not to classify it. But the general content of it, when anybody who got this read it, they knew instantly that this was hot stuff. You just don't push it around. So yeah, they didn't need to. It was so incredibly important, it didn't need to be stamped, because that would have targeted it for spies, I would think. Make it easy for them to take it in and go ahead.
You're correct. Yes, that was the reason.
Here, let me read a little bit more just for our listeners to give them an idea here, and then don't lose your place. This is so fascinating, all of it. Now we're talking about something here that refers back to a book by Dr. Oberth from 1923 and 1926, and some of it goes back even further than that. You have to think of the time frame. This is a brief abstract and some comments. Most of the book by Oberth is devoted to liquid fuel rockets, fundamental principles, dynamics, control, and astronautic speculations. Only the 22nd chapter, 15 pages, deals with what today would be called an unconventional method of propulsion. This, remember, is 1923. Called ionic. He called it electric propulsion. This is way back in the silent film days, in the early days. Already on page 110, Oberth states categorically, and if you don't know who Oberth was, look him up, Oberth, that contemporary science knows of 3 devices which would theoretically permit impelling a vehicle to escape velocity: the rocket, the electromagnetic gun, and the electric wind engine, electric propulsion. He admits, on page 111 of his book, that electric propulsion from takeoff would entail gigantic expenditures. However, as soon as a satellite station is established on a supra-atmospheric orbit, they're talking about satellites in 1920, he advocates electric propulsion as a means to produce 2 to 10 times greater exhaust velocities than by any chemical rocket. This man was a true visionary, a genius. This was all kept from the public. Nobody knew about any of this in 1920. And here it is being discussed and utilized in the early 1950s and recited chapter and verse in these abstracts and comments in the papers that are up there for you right now, thanks to Bill Tompkins. These have never been seen before, these papers. Keep that in mind. Okay, go ahead.
Well, it's just that the information that's in here, as you're saying, many of the people that were doing the studies, like in the 20s or even like in 1918,
the teens, yeah, right,
were addressing extraterrestrial propulsion. They were addressing extraterrestrial people, and that because there were so many people who had been contacted in Germany by different extraterrestrials, it was a common subject to discuss the propulsion. Mm-hmm. Now, what I'd like to say is that I'm going to get a little bit off base. Let's look at this think tank inside of Douglas. Okay? In some of the earlier structures of investigations by the Navy primarily, a group was put together in Douglas by the president of Douglas Aircraft, Donald Douglas Sr. He and 2 Navy admirals and 2 Army Air Corps generals, Pat Arnold being one of them, put together a program after they had seen the UFOs over Los Angeles in 1942.
February 1942, the so-called Battle of L.A.
Yeah, so those fellas all got together, and it was settled that instead of doing this in the Navy or the Army Air Corps, they were going to do it inside of Douglas Engineering. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
In a secret think tank that was never referred to as a think tank. That all came years later, but you just were exposed to the first aerospace think tank. Now, these fellows then worked for several years and were addressing virtually every possible subject that could come up. Later, like TRW did, only they went 10 times further. So these individuals, which are the people that are in this document, select for unconventional propulsion schemes, these people then work together and as a group inside of engineering. Mm-hmm. That's where I worked for on and off for 12 and a half years. Now, the organization then had a problem with security. And so it was decided that this group of people would separate from Douglas and form their own research group over in a rented office complex in Santa Monica. Mm-hmm. And they called themselves the RAND Group. And when you read all the times, you're going to say, okay, it's RAND. Well, what's RAND? Quite frankly, it's very simple. Research and development.
Got it.
Okay, maybe that's not the best way, but that's what it really is.
Sure.
And, of course, the thrust was extraterrestrial, not just propulsion. So now we have this RAND group, which at the time I came in, they had just made the divorce. And I say divorce because it was a fantastically difficult for 200 of these people who have been working inside of Douglas to make the decision whether they wanted to go to a separate organization, whether they wanted to stay in advanced design at Douglas, or did they want to just work back and forth between them. And so roughly of the 200, roughly 100 and probably 40 people went permanently into the new RAND facility. I say permanently because a third of them came back to Douglas after I got there. And I got there in 42 or 50, 52.
52. Uh-huh.
And so what we have here then is the individual physicist, PhD's trust, what direction he was going to personally develop. So obviously propulsion was the biggest problem. Communications and navigation and all the other areas were just put aside, and roughly 95% was all propulsion. What in the world can we propel these things by? What do we have to do? Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of the atmosphere that I went into, where we still had a substantial number of the PhDs working and not wanting to address the RAND group themselves, but were thrusting even more into the mission aspect and then the requirements for different propulsion for long-range missions. It got very complicated. And my point is that these people were essentially the top people on your planet studying this, with the exception of the geniuses in Germany.
Uh-huh.
And that's a very real statement. And I think that we don't give Germany itself enough of the history that they've been involved in many different technical fields.
Well, they've been shorted by what we call history hugely ever since the war, for obvious reasons. The winners write the story. But this goes back, as you've said, to the 20s and the 30s. Werner Oberth was incredible, and he's not the only one. These people were in contact with off-planet intelligence, which was seriously engaged in helping us crawl up out of the mud and to take our place among the stars. And if you look at the click here in that third homepage art piece, you'll see it. Just go down below the two above it. Click here. That'll take you to the main index page, which is the repository of all the documentation that Bill is alluding to now. And you can read the introduction. Then you've got 5 links to click on below that. PDFs. There are about 80 pages already up there. And do read the quotations of Ben Rich, the former director of Lockheed Skunk Works, shortly before he passed. These are stunning statements. They're all true. They're all real. And once you can accept that as a stepping stone to jump into this incredible information treasure that we have up there now. Because remember, it's all about perspective. If you understand what happened in the past, you'll understand where we are now. And without that past, it all becomes fuzzy for a lot of people. So you started at Douglas in 1952. I think my father started in 56 or 57, something like that. He was there at the same time Bill was for years. And I used to hear some little snippets here and there about how unusual a place Douglas was to work. He knew. He went to all the launches at Cape Canaveral, later KSC, and then, of course, Vandenberg. And he knew von Braun and others. He wouldn't talk much about it, though. He was the director of public relations, and he had a good idea what was going on. Not as much as Bill by any means, but he knew, and I used to hear about it when I was a little kid. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I think that's very interesting, too, because your dad actually attended not just the launches, but he went down where they were doing the planning for missions, where they were doing program modifications. He got into the various laboratories down at the Cape. And so he was involved in and exposed to Flight Stand's Proving Ground, where all other testing was taking place on a massive program. Mm-hmm. And he knew what was going on, so his position was to make sure certain things didn't get out and other things that were needed did get out. And I think that's a very important position.
Yeah, you're so right, and you've summed it up perfectly. Yeah, it's like that's the actual tap. You turn it on, you turn it off. You drip here, you drip there. Very, very interesting. It must have been an incredible environment. The 1950s in this country, so much was going on that people just don't understand or appreciate at this point. That's another reason why these documents are so absolutely fascinating to look through. Go ahead, Mr. Tompkins. This is amazing.
Okay. Once again, when you talked about RAN, that is still the number one technical organization on the planet for the United States. Mm-hmm. They have facilities right here in San Diego. They've got facilities all over the planet on different programs. And RAN Corporation is the number one technical organization involved in extraterrestrial. I think it's very interesting that came out of the secret think tank inside of Douglas.
Fascinating. And what it means is research and development, R&D. That's funny. It's amazing.
Okay, when you start looking through the different pages, you're going to see many different people are interviewed. And when I say interviewed, this is my boss inside the secret think tank was Dr. Klemperer. He was a German. He was brilliant, but he had come to United States like back in the 30s, mm-hmm. and ended up in engineering at Douglas. And then when the program got started on extraterrestrial, he was then assigned that position. He ran it. His boss then was the vice president of engineering. And like we said before, when manufacturing started to take over the company, which you shouldn't allow, they knew that there were things going on in engineering that are way over what we were supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. And so they started to investigate the think tank, and so programs were set up to where a big discussion took place, and finally they took the reins away from Donald Douglas Sr. and took over the company. And so our vice president of engineering, the principal person in the secret think tank, quit Douglas and went over to Lockheed and became a principal individual running the Lockheed Skunk Works. Uh-huh. And I have to say it's interesting that when the situation got so bad that you couldn't talk anymore, and so the best thing to do is to quit and go someplace else. Uh-huh. That was a 180, which, of course, totally ruined Douglas. And later on, McDonnell bought Douglas, mm-hmm. and then even later, Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas.
Yeah.
And, but this document, this unconventional propulsion schemes, okay? I personally worked on probably 20, maybe 30 of these different programs when I was in the secret think tank. So this document is not mine. Jeff, you wanted to know how I got it. This is my working document that I happened to take home when I left the company. Actually, it's a different story, but I got fired for taking the information to NASA, Von Braun, and Dr. Davis. And the company got a $79 million systems engineering contract, and I got to work on that for a couple of months, and then they fired me. And it was the manufacturing people who actually had me fired, believe it or not.
That's as so many firings, that's crazy. That's nuts.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, that this document itself, I think is really important, because you can read through this, you can understand what these people were doing way back then, and you're talking about years ago, and yet most people, even in this program on extraterrestrial, the technical, had no idea that this document existed, or that all of these people were technical consultants to the secret think tank. Even though we had like 60 or 70 still after the separation that were inside the engineering department, which was separate structure inside, but it was a facility that was implementing every possible method of coming up, not with just one propulsion. You have to realize that you first have to define a mission. Is it a mission to the moon? Is it a mission to Mars? Is it a mission to, say, Alpha Centauri, our closest star? Is it a mission to the 12th star of the nearest stars? There's different requirements for different ranges of continuous flight. And so you're reading different people's approach. Way back then, they were doing this.
Right.
And I think this is a staggering document to go through.
Oh, it fills in an enormous gap in our knowledge timeline. People don't even understand that this was being discussed, talked about by Hermann Oberth, for example, in the 1920s, the teens, even before that. And I again repeat, the book that we are citing in some of the documents that you provided, first published in Munich and Berlin in 1929, and then reproduced by J.W. Edwards of Edwards Brothers, Ann Arbor, in 1945, under the license, this is key, of Alien Property Custodian. So this publishing company got the rights to reproduce Oberth's book from 1929 and 1945 under government license of Alien Property Custodian. Okay? I hope that helps give you an idea of the ET component in this enormous effort that was going on. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, if you just read even Westinghouse propulsion system was contacted, and they, of course, were working on other approaches themselves for propulsion because that's their business.
Right, sure.
And Lockheed is into it, but they're primarily into it for the vehicle and then the propulsion to operate the vehicle. And Bell Telephone people are in it. And so you have the major corporations involved in a Douglas secret think tank program for different types of extraterrestrial type vehicles that will be able to operate out in the galaxy, not the solar system, but out in the galaxy. And so Westinghouse, being a major producer, of engines, reciprocating type, and then later jet engines, they're obviously the people that are working on space propulsion. Then you have over at Pasadena, you have the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Mm-hmm.
And these people are in this program. They're supporting the Douglas technical program to produce propulsion, even though that's their job.
Uh-huh.
They then were advisors to Elmer Wheaton and Dr. Klemper. And so Klemper himself went to these facilities. Once in a while, they would come to Douglas. But what I'm trying to say is you don't realize how many different propulsion systems were being addressed and the multiple number of companies, organizations, universities,
mm-hmm.
which were working at a secret level on a system that nobody even knew where to start. And and many of them had packages 10 years earlier from the U.S. Navy Naval Air Station San Diego, Admiral Riccobata's information from his operatives out of Germany again. And I think that this sequence of events, this timeline that we're talking about here, is amazing at what was taking place so many years back and had been taking the top technical people in Germany and the top people later on in the United States. That's the number one mission of any other thing that was being studied.
Mm-hmm.
This is a tremendous little document.
Well, it's one of those compendiums of documents that you can open it up anywhere and start reading and find something just fascinating. There is more. Here, let's see. I don't know, what date is this? 1953. This is Professor Dr. E. Sanger, Paris, took a step into the distant future with his lecture on photon rockets. 1953. Theoretically, it is possible to conceive of spaceships which use the light pressure of a tremendously powerful light beam for propulsion, whereas the so-called adiabatic rockets, i.e. the chemical rockets, thermal and pure atomic rockets, pass the released energy to the whole mass concerned in the reaction, accelerating it to speeds far below that of light. In the diabatic photon rocket, the whole energy released in a nuclear reaction is radiated in the form of light energy that is not passed to the reacting substances. This gives considerably poorer momentum per unit of energy. With complete transformation of the reaction substance into radiation, momentum output, however, will be equal to that of adiabatic rockets, as both processes coincide here. You can read, these are direct quotations from some of the world's greatest scientific minds working on intergalactic space travel, ultimately. It's what they were doing.
Amazing.
It certainly is.
Over on page 037 there, they're talking about a different type of propulsion entirely. And the discovery of this particular propulsion, which was previously unknown, it's an unknown field, actually came up with a meso field, MESO. And this field was not even known. And here we've discussed a number of weeks ago, we talked about free energy out in the galaxy.
Yeah.
And essentially what we're saying there is that there's enough small particles of energy, which of course we're not using, but out in the galaxy, And we can pick those up and use those as a propulsion. And so when we talked about the meso field, we were talking about this free energy or a version of it. And so when you say that it's free, it essentially is free because it's already there. You just have to get a hold of it.
Right.
And it's in your atmosphere, so again, all you have to do is get a hold of it and use it. But like we've discussed before, the oil companies, some of the electrical companies are forcing us to use their method, and so once again, it costs us money.
Well, we're captives in the profit-motivated corporations which run the world. We don't have much to say about it, except now we have the opportunity, thanks to you and this data, and this is the first batch of more to come, that we can see how much is out there. There's so much going on. We're really kept in a little thimble in terms of our knowledge. They don't want us to step into a visionary profile. They want to keep us in a simple reactive situation, not proactive. So here's another little quote from Professor Sanger. He says, talking about this light beam, interplanetary speeds of several percent of the speed of light. 1953, interplanetary speeds of several percent of the speed of light would be possible. All right? It's light beam.
Knows you can't go faster than 186.
That's right. Now, I ran another story in headlines the other day that talked about Einstein may be completely wrong, that we can exceed the speed of light. Now, here it is in 1953 being talked about in this data that is now up for you to read. The professor says its light beam, which is comparable to a hydrogen bomb explosion expanded in time and space, should never pass within several thousand kilometers of the Earth or other spaceships, as it would otherwise burn everything up. So they knew of the vastness of the incredible potential and power of what they were dealing with. They had that, and this is what they were working on. And as Bill says, all over the world, different groups of scientists, in many cases, probably most unbeknownst to each other, they were daisy-chained together, but it was a secret issue. They were compartmentalized, and yet they were all working toward the same goal of intergalactic, interplanetary travel. And that's what this is about. It's really remarkable. Bill, we have about 2 minutes before we have to pause for our first break, so go ahead.
Well, just a quickie here. When we're talking about this missile field, at the bottom of the page, he says here that this furnishes a slight system of six-dimensional, non-linear differential support for the propulsion system. Now, what he's saying in the whole paragraph is that we look at everything in three dimensions. This fellow that put this package together, he's looking at a system which utilizes six dimensions.
Wow.
And we only know about three. But back when this was being done, this was 44, 53, I'm sorry. This was, these people were studying the space propulsion system as being operated in an environment of six dimensions.
That's 60, 70 years ago. Now this brings up the other issue, oh my gosh, is right, about Einstein and how many people in physics today say he was the be-all and end-all, and that's where it starts and that's where it ends. He figured it all out. No. He's on the doorstep of walking into an entirely different realm. Even then people realized that there was so much more going on.
Very good. Excellent.
Now, we have to take a break. If you just joined us, talking with Bill Tompkins, and you're invited to click under Bill's name, and you'll be able to go to the data here, or just look at the third illustrated piece at the top of Rense.com, and there's a click here link that'll take you right to the main index page of the UFO ET Interstellar Spacecraft Propulsion Technology Disclosure, which is what this is. Finally, the truth. UFO ET Interstellar Spacecraft Propulsion Technology Disclosure. Underway.
And when we come back, I'm going to talk about another one of Einstein's theories which doesn't work.
Very good.
Wow.
We'll do it. Hold on. Bill and I will be right back in just a few minutes. Okay, welcome back. Hour number 2. Jeff Rense with Bill Tompkins. And what we are learning is where we have been. And that will help a lot of us figure out where we're going. Got to have a rear view mirror, and thanks to Bill, we have a knockout. This is, again, stunning documents. Do go, spend some time, and read, and listen to this program. Share it. I think if you listen to the program twice, you'll get even much more out of it. There's so much happening, and it's really hard for a lot of people, younger and older people, to believe that this was going on back then. And where we are now, that was 70 years ago. So go ahead, Bill. Onward. This is amazing. More about Einstein, and he's considered such a faultless god by many. And I've talked to people in physics, and they just go prostrate in front of him, and they will not question anything he does or says. He figured it out. It's all been done, 70, 80 years, 90 years ago by Einstein, and it just isn't true. We know so little about what we have as a species developed. 6 dimensions, as you mentioned. 6 dimensions, not 3. That should open a door in your mind. Let me go to the main directory page, the one I alluded to, and read these comments by Ben Rich for you. A lot of you don't know them. Some of you have read them before. Let me read this one, and I'll ask all of you to understand that these are credible, real comments. Ben Rich said, "We already have the means to travel among the stars. But these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." Ben Rich, former director of Lockheed Skunk Works, shortly before he passed. Just an amazing statement. From there you go on to another statement, and then you'll find the PDFs that we've been alluding to. There are 4 of them. And there's a preface that I'd like all of you to take a look at as well before you go into the others. It will help set the stage. All right. Einstein, held as a god by many people, even in physics today. The ultimate, the be-all, the end-all, the man who could make no mistakes, the man who figured it all out and ended all means or need to continue serious inquiry into physics. Nothing could be further from the truth. Einstein deserves his credit, his just due. He got us to the door, but he didn't go through that door. He stopped at the top step on the porch. Go ahead.
Okay, this is back to this iso field and how it got started.
Right.
And I'm just going to read this one little bit. This furnished 8 systems of 6-dimensional nonlinear differential equations which described a universal cosmic law. Now, what he is saying here is that this was a discovery that was made in attempting to come up with a workable spaceship propulsion system. And in addressing it, he's looking at a system that doesn't match anything in mathematics. So what did we just say to ourselves? We said once again, and I hate to keep talking about, I don't know, Jeff says these things all the time, but it turns out that information which we have and we are taught in the universities is incorrect information, whether it's mathematics, whether it's astronomy, whether it's physics, it doesn't make any difference. Essentially, for thousands of years, we've gone to school, we got our degrees, we got our doctors, and we end up, I don't have one of those, we end up being the top man in that technical field, but the information was wrong. So here on page 37, the first thing they run into is that they went to a 6-dimensional concept approach, which doesn't even fit into mathematics, period. It defies Einstein's theory of relativity. And all we're saying is we're in a learning curve. We've had our heads in the sand here on this planet for a long time. And it's interesting when you read some of these programs, the approaches that people have taken and the discoveries that come from addressing something different than the mathematics or different than the astronomy. It's amazing to me. I'm sorry I didn't want to get on the soapbox, but go ahead. No, that you should. This is where you really stand out, and you can help many see much further than they would ever even imagine. This is all important. The knowledge that we have predicated our existence on and our entire academic bedrock is flawed. It's not complete. It's rudimentary, it's elementary in many ways, and it's wrong, as Bill said. I'm not a physicist. I can't tell you that from a position of having a PhD in the field. But I can tell you what I've read and what I've heard for years and years match perfectly with what Bill is inviting us to explore, that we need a lot more schooling. When we get to the end and there's nothing else to learn, how boring will that be? And yet that's exactly what many physicists seem to suggest. I think privately many of them probably know that there's an awful lot out there that we haven't even peeked at yet. So, Bill, go right ahead. This is fascinating. Well, it's on page 41 over there. They're going into another type of a propulsion, and they've talked about the use of vacuum tubes in being able to analyze the system. Well, gee whiz. Vacuum tubes ran out several weeks ago, okay?
Yes.
And it shows...
Except in my 1930s radio collection. They still work.
Okay. Yeah. look at the technical accomplishments that we've really made in a very short period of time.
Well, the learning graph comes along, it crawls along through the millennia and the centuries, and all of a sudden it almost goes straight up, probably 70 degrees. It just goes up. It rocks if you look at it. It's quite stunning. The learning, the information, the knowledge, the wisdom just took off in that period of time that we're talking about, in the 40s and 50s. Go ahead.
Well, and actually, a great deal of what's in this document referred to nuclear propulsion. But when they got through with that, they found that there were many problems with nuclear.
Right.
And so the solving of these problems, maybe you want to hit them with that part, Jeff, on the nuclear.
Well, wrap it up for us. I'll be reading the wrong parts, and just give us the idea that it was something that had too many faults that couldn't all be corrected to make it really efficient and really safe. It was very unwieldy. It was just not an efficient system. Is that fair?
Absolutely, and the word "safe" was put to the side and said, "Okay, we're going to go ahead and do it anyway." And so yes, they went ahead and developed the nuclear bombs. Mm-hmm. And like we said before, we blew up some of Japan, and then we did a whole bunch of testing afterwards. And so
the radionuclides of which are still floating above our heads around the planet in the upper atmosphere. They haven't all settled out. And that was in the 1940s and 50s when we blew up all those islands in the South Pacific. Crazy. And then we lit them off in the Nevada desert, killed John Wayne, among other people. Lots of people died from those. It's all a story that it kind of points to what I just posted on the site today. They're now admitting that the Hanford nuclear reservation, that they call it a former nuclear facility. Hanford, no, it's not former at all, has been and is causing innumerable deaths and suffering in terms of catastrophic illness among people who simply live in the area, especially east, downwind from Hanford. So yes, the nuclear genie never should have been let out of the bottle. One of the worst mistakes ever on this planet in known history. Fukushima being, of course, at the top of the list. Something that is out of control now, worse than it was 5.5 years ago, and is not going to be resolved any time in the foreseeable future. The North Pacific Ocean is largely depleted of life forms now. It's nothing like it used to be. And it's going to get worse and worse. Fukushima, you never hear about it. When's the last time CNN told you anything about Fukushima, or anybody? Nobody. We talk about it here, but that's it. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, actually, you're right, Jeff, that we don't talk about it. We don't say what happened. We don't address the damage that took place there. And the damage that will continue to take place. We may never fix it.
That's okay? Right.
And so I'm not trying to say I'm an environmentalist and we shouldn't do certain things. We should never have done what we did in any respect as far as nuclear. And many extraterrestrial civilizations came here because they picked that up immediately when you did it. And a lot of people are asking, well, why do we have so many extraterrestrial UFOs here? That's your answer, sir.
And why do they hang around our ICBM bases with multiple nuclear warheads, MIRVed warheads? Why do they hang around nuclear power plants? They're watching this planet very closely and carefully because of the nuclear catastrophe we are constantly playing with. It's almost like we want to end our civilization such as it is. And we may have in the past several times. There's ample evidence of a nuclear war or some kind of nuclear cataclysm in India. There are nuclear readings and radionuclides in the ground all over the place in one large area. It may be that Mars had a nuclear war at one time, and apparently a lot of our visitors, as Bill said, are here watching what we're doing. Maybe they'll make us stop. One can only hope before it's too late.
Yes, and I have to say, I'm not going to say which facility, but I personally was required to participate in a review of one of the Air Force's ICBM facilities, which had been shut down. And so this is not some joke. It's not some person's made-up story. The extraterrestrials shut the system down. Now, they did this purposely because they wanted to let you know that this is a no-no. They actually, from what's been determined now, through, I'm not going to say where, but they shut an equal number of Soviet ICBMs down at the same time. And they're letting both of us know you shouldn't be doing this. And you're being slapped on the wrist pretty hard. So they have the capability of shutting down your capability of operating ICBMs. Don't kid yourself. And but playing with nuclear, gee whiz, we've got a nuclear facility just north of San Diego here. They still can't figure out how to remove the reactor. They don't know how to remove all of the tanks, which have got all the other stuff in it. It's sitting there, it's not operating, and it's leaking. And they want the state of California to pay for the removal of this. And so there's all kinds of legal aspects going on. But what it comes down to is you have another large nuclear facility, which was leaking before. It's still leaking. But unlike Oregon, who got really upset with the situation, they demanded that it be removed, and they got the funds to remove it, and they took it out. And that's what needs to take place here in San Diego, because it's their own thing to do. Everybody knows it, but it continues to be a problem.
Very well said.
Let's get back. Yeah, let's get back with some of the interesting things that are in this particular document. When you're talking about what fields or what methods, what technical abilities that you know about that can be used for some sort of a propulsion system. On this one page, they talked about atomic hydrogen as a form of propulsion. But then they got into the problems with it. And they have high voltage discharge problems, which couldn't be controlled. They got a result of excited mercury, which gets to be out of control. They had ultraviolet light being implemented. They had even standard X-ray and gamma ray and alpha particles and ingredients which were being floating around in the system. So they said back then when this document was printed, no nuclear. Okay, now it's not that they didn't look at it, because there's quite a number of people that addressed it. But they then looked at what you had to deal with, and they said no. And I think this is interesting. These people, which they're really the RAND Corporation, okay? They said no, don't do that. And I've read articles about different doctors at RAND that said we are working on a nuclear this and nuclear that. That's somebody's pipe dream. That's not the truth. You got the truth right here in this document, and they themselves studied it in dozens of different ways and came to the conclusion, you better not do that. That's not good for you. I don't want to give them more credit than they deserve, but I have to say this is exceptional, really. What's in this document is, I think, technically and even morally.
Right. Good point. Yeah. There are moral ethics and boundaries and parameters which you don't really hear about much with science. It's kind of like, well, if mankind or humankind can figure out how to do it, damn the consequences, they're going to do it. And that, unfortunately, has been how many things have come into being that are and could spell our demise.
Yeah. Over in, I guess, 2/3 the way through the book, it says, no new proposals are presented for the application of nuclear energy for propulsion. And the authorities concluded that an oxygen hydrogen drive is probably the best method, pending new technology developments, but nuclear should not be used.
Right.
Wow. And so it's not that Jeff is saying we shouldn't be using nuclear. These guys came to that conclusion way back then.
Yeah.
And I don't think this doesn't get published because they don't want you to know what took place. And they want to push the oil companies. They want to push the electrical systems.
They want to push the nuclear industry too, Bill, and they're still building reactors. Not many, but they're still building them. There are plans on the board. They're crazy. This was known in the 1940s and 50s. This was potentially a death sentence for the planet. Once you let that genie out, you'll never get it back. And look what we've done. Every nuclear power plant on the planet is basically storing its nuclear waste. There's nowhere to put it. They're supposed to be custodians of it for at least 50,000 years. And these plants only have a 40-year life expectancy. Where's the return? This is completely insane. Completely. There's no justification for anything nuclear, period. None of it.
Okay, they're also talking about outer space where things do not weigh anything and very low load factors should be acceptable. They're talking about construction of the vehicle. Even though the propulsion is going to put stress on the fuselage or the basic structure of the vehicle, in space, you don't have the same structure that you do with the gravitational field of the planet.
We're going to go through the break, Todd. Go ahead, Bill.
People don't address that either. Okay, you say, well, you have to launch it from here, but better that you put the parts together in a large satellite, or like we had planned back in the 40s, build a 10,000-man research and naval research and operational base underneath the ground on the moon. And so it's a lot better to the vehicles to do that were called Novas. And again, you see Novas in that book. And the Nova vehicles were to get the hardware up there to build the underground facilities. Also, at the same time, the planning was not to build the space vehicles here, but build them on a base on the moon. Because of the gravitational field situation where you can structurally build it and you don't have to build a launching capability with a gravitational field on Earth. So once again, we're talking about not just missions that people are not addressing, but we're talking about geometry, we're talking about physics, and we're talking about virtually every technical field being incorrect to deal with reality. And this is over and over and over in this document. To me, it's interesting that we're talking about this. People around the planet are hearing it. Hopefully, some of this is going to excite some other people, and they're going to take the ball and run with it.
Well, what you've gifted us all with in this first installment, and there will be more, is again an overview of our scientific collectivity that no one has ever seen before. In terms of space, in terms of out there, in terms of the universe in which we live. We have a galaxy that is enormous. And think of all the billions of stars and hundreds of billions of planets that are out there. And there's people who sit around saying that there is no other intelligent life out there or that can get here because Einstein said so. They just don't get it. And I feel sorry for them that their minds, well, it's like Stanton Friedman said years ago, 20-some years ago he said this to me, don't bother me with the facts. My mind is made up.
Wow. Over and over.
Yeah. Well, whenever you idolize and make someone into a deity, like they do with Einstein, and put a cap on a field, you got to think, well, maybe there's more to it than that. And what in reality is going on, of course, is that black ops physics is way beyond that, would be my guess. Again, I'm no physicist and I haven't been there, but looking at the data and connecting the dots, I would say that there is a tremendous amount of science that is obviously not being discussed. Look what they weren't talking about 60 and 70 years ago, and imagine where they are now. Really something. But you're so right about nuclear, Bill. The day the Earth stood still, 1951, when one of our visitors came here, our fellow galactic friends, and gave the planet a deadline. Whatever it was, a week, 2 weeks, 30 days. You've got 30 days to dismantle all of your nuclear programs, weapons, everything, or we will destroy the planet. They know how dirty nuclear is. They know they don't want it off this planet. And that's the end. And that film was so important, so portentous, and so correct that it is truly one of the greatest films ever because of the message. You talk about morals, and there they are. The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951, and you wonder what director-producer Robert Wise knew when he was making that film, if he wasn't told about some things and maybe encouraged to make it. What a film. Michael Rennie, just an amazing film.
Yes.
Just imagine, Bill, the scientists that we're talking about tonight who are quoted in these documents were alive then, most of them, and I'm sure a lot of them saw that film, and I'm sure a lot of them got the message. But they couldn't stop it. Too much money. It's all about money. Not one nuclear power plant has ever turned a penny profit. Never will. And all they've done is drain the resources and finances of those who they allegedly serve and leave the countryside strewn with radioactive death, which will never stop giving. It's the gift that keeps right on going.
It's very unfortunate that we've allowed ourselves to get into this because actually we've been controlled. And I hate to bring up this word mind control, but quite frankly, that's what it is.
You bet.
And it's a subject that really needs to be addressed because we're not in a good position. It's not that being out in the galaxy, we're going to get chopped up by some bad guy extraterrestrials. Most of the facts that we've been able to put together indicate that 2/3 of people out there are benevolent. They're not all bad guys. But it takes a few bad guys to totally destroy planets. And we're just talking about a few stars close to us that have several numbers of planets too. And we look at the size of the galaxies, the number of galaxies, and it's insanity to think that everything is bad. We can fix this, but we need to be honest with what we're saying, and we need to collectively understand what the situation really is and take a collective approach and fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, good thoughts. Very, very important thoughts. Go ahead, Bill.
I just want to talk a little bit about this. This is not the back page, but it's Dr. Klemper talking. And he gets into sort of a preliminary of a completion of this document, because there was another one that came out after this did 3 years later. But he's saying that the most important thing that came out of the studies was that we should not be using nuclear, and that we should address what would be undocumented, unmathematical approaches which could possibly give us the type of propulsion we would want to use. Mm-hmm. And what he's really saying is, okay, we have to work with what we've got. But like we had just discussed here earlier this evening, this one fella comes up with a 6-dimensional system, whereas we only know and operate in mathematics, we only work with a 3-dimensional. But what Elmer Wheaton is saying is that don't turn this off. Look at and address approaches that may not fit into our normal mathematics. Mm-hmm. Look at the other approach, and the one where this individual, he does his study, and to make his work, he's got to operate in 6 dimensions. How do we do that? Mm-hmm. And I think that you're sort of addressing, we really need to back off and look through a big window. We're playing with a small portion of what's going on. We're just standing here by the fence, and we're looking over the fence out in the galaxy, and we don't know what's going on. We make up our mind, you can't do this and you can't do that because mathematics said so-and-so.
Right.
And tunnel vision. Document,
that's right.
Right in this document, they're saying there's another approach that can be used for propulsion, but it requires the use of 6 dimensions. Wow. I think that's cool.
That's very, very, very interesting. If you look up, by the way, RAND, R-A-N-D, we've all heard of it, RAND Corporation, and after what Bill told us earlier, if you look it up, you read, here's the primary exposition of what RAND is. RAND Corporation is an American nonprofit global policy think tank originally formed by Douglas Aircraft Company to offer research and analysis to the United States Armed Forces. It is financed by the U.S. government and private endowments. RAND Corporation is an American nonprofit global policy think tank originally formed, as I said, by Douglas Aircraft. Keep that in mind. And you heard it here from Bill tonight, how it all started.
Wild. Really.
Yeah.
I don't want to make a big deal about this, but really, I think this is extremely interesting that we're talking about this. And you go further back into it, and then you get into this situation. The subject title on this particular is Aboard Flying Saucers. Oh, my goodness. What's this all about? And so here we've really been talking around the subject all evening, and now we're on the several pages at the end of the document, and now we're talking about flying saucers. And, of course, that's what the whole thing was all about.
Yeah.
But you get all of this negative approaches and impossible approaches, and then some of them actually can provide a start for developing that kind of propulsion, even if we have to use 6 dimensions to do it. And so I think where we get into this other, let me just read this one. The author claimed to have seen at elevated separate occasions a lone human visitor permitted to be on board a 300-foot saucer landed on a desert area by a crew of small men handling by a beautiful lady captain from a planet. I guess her name's in here. This is in a document on propulsion.
From the 1950s.
No, wait a minute. Yeah, wait a minute. I'm not going to go and read this thing to you. You guys got to look this up. But you get the point. Yes, top technical people have been aboard extraterrestrial vehicles here in the United States. And surprisingly enough, the captain turns out to be another tall, blue-eyed blonde. Oh, my goodness. What are we talking about? Nordics?
You know, it's funny when you think about our culture and our history, how blue-eyed blondes have a special niche in it. And there's a reason for that.
What's the reason?
You've just been telling us about it for the last 3 or 4 months. It's called Nordics. And
okay.
They come here and they clearly are involved with some very good things. And it makes me really sad to even go over all of this because I see the potential of the species and the potential of the planet, and I see where we're being dragged and taken. We're not even kicking and screaming anymore. We're being lulled into a state of mental stasis that allows us to be taken wherever they want, addicted to whatever they want, and just pushed around like sheep. And that's where it's all going. This next generation, they're calling it millennials now. What about the generation after the millennials, which are often called by me moronials? They're just dumb. They don't have the tools. There's a course now being taught in college which is called adultography. And they're putting these kids who come to college who have no tools of survival or the ability to interact and create their environment in such a way that it will benefit them or anyone else. They're completely helpless. They're having to study in college how to be an adult, Bill. That's pretty scary.
How to be an adult. Oh, my gosh. We are in trouble. Well, I just... I'm going to go ahead and say something here. This young lady that was the boss of this 300-foot diameter saucer. Now, this is in the secret document we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. It's not that she was a very nice person, but she spoke English.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent English, and she also spoke a whole bunch of other languages, too. And, wow. Okay, this is a report, but and it's dated 1954. Wow. I think that having that, you have to read the whole thing, having that in this document is interesting because it takes you out of the frame of trying to figure out how to make a propulsion, and it allows you to visualize a 300-foot diameter vehicle that came here from some other star's planet, and it had nice people on board.
Mm-hmm.
And all they wanted to do was help. Wow. Very interesting.
A novel idea. All they wanted to do was help.
Yeah. And, but like you're saying, we're going to have to get to the point of implementing this, call it whatever you want. It's disclosure. And we need disclosure because we need to understand who we are, what's happened, and what's going to happen if we let this to continue. And we're already in trouble. We need to fix a whole lot of things, but we can do it. But if we don't get together and implement disclosure, we're really going to be in trouble because it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse.
We need to learn how to take care of ourselves. Unfortunately, the controllers of this planet are working to the antithetical end of that goal, that desirable goal. They want us to be unable to take care of ourselves, to be totally dependent, and therefore their control becomes that much easier. They've already got control. We're already in a prison I call the prison of usury, debt. It's a money prison, and we're not going to get out of it very easily. And that's the truth.
Well, what's your suggestion, Jeff? How do you see this, and how do you feel we should address it?
Bill, when I see stories like this, Portland adulting school teaches millennials how to be functional grown-ups, I don't think we're evolving in a liberated way. I think we're being directed, or this kind of thing wouldn't even be written. This is absurd. So there we go. No, I don't think it's going to happen on its own, Bill. I think something, unfortunately, what word can I use? Very aggressive is going to have to happen to tear down the contemporary paradigm, reconstruct it along proper lines of normal evolutionary patterns, and start basically from scratch. It's a generational process. We're going to have to take the next generation, whenever that time gets here, and raise that generation appropriately to respect, to respond, to interact, and integrate with the planet, with our resources, and with our future and our potential. It's going to have to happen. It's not going to happen in the hands in whose we're being held right now. They won't allow it. That's my thought.
I agree with you there. Yes, definitely. And I agree with you 100%. I've been hoping that we could put together, actually, there are now 5 separate groups that are pushing for disclosure, and I feel that that's going to help us, but like you say, it's not going to fix it. We have to take one step at a time and fix each area that's the problem.
Right.
And we have to do it legally, and we need to have some people put in prison after they've had a good judge to listen to to what they've done.
Right.
But we still need to address everything that's upside down and come up with a fix for these so that we can implement what's really necessary to make the full change.
Absolutely.
And I'm hoping that we can get an earlier turnaround of the young people to address their education, not listen to everything that they're being taught. And that's, again, another problem because we have to fix the teachers. But
the whole system, Bill, the whole system has grown in the wrong direction. It's grown in a negative, occultic, satanic, dark. The word is evil. It's not. We're not growing into enlightenment. Now, there are many people on this planet who are the opposite of that, and they get it. But they're not in control. They're not the dominant group in this species of ours. But listen to this story. Portland. It's in Portland, Maine, not Oregon, by the way. Let me just read a little of this. It's crazy. Millennials, people born between the early 1980s to the mid-1990s, are often labeled as lazy, spoiled, and unable to act mature enough to handle adulthood. But a new adulting school in Portland, Maine is trying to change things by teaching millennials the skills required to function as real adults. We are in real trouble. Real trouble. There's a tremendous demand for this. This is the first manifestation of it I've seen in print. But these people are dysfunctional, these young people, many of them. And they're not going to learn through osmosis. They've got to be retrained, rewired, if you will. But to do that, we have to take the whole planetary system of greed and lust and carnal and all the rest of the negatives and expunge it. We have to remove it, and we've got to start over again on a much higher level. I think we've arisen on this planet, Bill, as a species a number of times and fallen into essentially the same hole and had to start over again. So maybe we'll get it right one time.
Okay, I agree, but I don't quite, I'm not addressing it quite that way. I'd like to stand on the soapbox for a minute.
Please do.
And there's a thing that's called the United States Navy League, and I've been involved with the Navy League for, gee whiz, since working at Douglas. And so the Navy League is, I don't know, there's 50,000 people in the Navy League. And the standard approach is that the Navy League is to support Navy families and help them when they're into problems, and because the husband, being a man or a woman, are at sea sometimes for long periods of time, and that makes it hard on the family. So that's one of the principal functions of the Navy League. But then there's another part of it, and it's the area that I have been involved in for like over 50 years, okay? And that's extraterrestrial studies. And so the Navy League Council that we had started up there in Oregon,
Medford, Oregon, yeah.
And we found, for whatever reason, that there was a large number of retired naval officers that lived in that area. And so when I took some of my ship models and put them in the mall up there, and I just talked about the ship models, we used this as sort of an advertising of setting up a Navy League Council in Southern Oregon. And so it was extremely successful, and the organization grew very fast. And it turned out that we had something like 70% were retired naval officers. And so they, of course, were gung-ho on the Sea Cadets. Well, what's the Sea Cadet? That's a separate program that the Navy League has, and they have Navy League councils all over the world, actually, U.S. And so they sponsor roughly the children in pre-high school age, because some schools just go directly from the lower level right into high school.
Mm-hmm.
And other states and other areas have
middle school,
an intermediate group. And so that's the age group that we were pushing for. And I was privileged in being able to be one of the speakers at even our first Sea Cadet group that we were able to put together, which was a sizable number of children, okay? And then they ended up with essentially a Sea Cadet program where they actually are trained in military naval programs.
It's kind of like a junior ROTC orientation.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Except that we use the Navy's reserve facility in the Medford area. We use the airport offices for some of our meetings. We brought in the mayor. He was one of our members. We have the top commissioners.
Go ahead, Bill. Okay. You had some of the county commissioners. Yeah, I know that. Let's pause. Let's pause right now. We'll come back in just a minute. You mentioned the mall. That was interesting. You put your ship models in there. Huh. That's very interesting.
For a short time.
Yeah. Okay. Bill, hold on. We have to pause here at the top of the hour. So get yourself a glass of water or whatever, and we'll be right back in a few minutes and carry on with Mr. William Mills Tompkins. With Bill Tompkins. And tomorrow, December 1st, the end of the year already. That's an awfully quick year. Bill, you want to finish up what you were telling us about the Navy League efforts with young people, and then we might want to go back to the documentation that refers to flying saucers and revisit some of that. That's very pertinent and relevant to the whole issue. So tell us about the Navy League and what they were doing. I was in that mall, that very mall you mentioned today.
Oh, no kidding. Well, you know the whole area. So we formed this Navy League Council, and I was fortunate enough to get the commander of Naval Base Washington, which is also commander of Subgroup 9, Admiral, to come down to Medford and at the Red Lion Hotel have our first holy water thrown on the Navy League Council. And so he was very, very pleased to realize that our startup included the Sea Cadets. And So he talked a little bit about the Sea Cadets and that he brings on board his submarines. And he's commander of Subgroup 9, and Subgroup 9 up in Seattle is the Boomers. These are the largest submarines that we have, and they carry intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Bremerton.
And, yes, and so he made it a point to contact one of his officers there and review their programs to expose the Sea Cadets to the Navy. So we made arrangements for that, of course, and so the Sea Cadets got to ride on the ballistic missile submarines on missions.
Wow.
And they then also went on missions aboard aircraft carriers. They went on missions aboard cruisers and on destroyers in storms at sea. And like I think we mentioned one time before, the commander was a young lady they carried the same titles as both officers and enlisted men. Mm-hmm. And they march and they review all different aspects of the Navy. But on this one destroyer cruise out of Seattle, they got into a bad storm, and one of the Sea Cadets got washed overboard. Now, remember that the Sea Cadets actually come on board the aircraft carrier or whatever ship it is, and they parallel an enlisted man or an officer. So if the Sea Cadet is a lieutenant commander in the Sea Cadets, he carries that or she carries that rank. Mm-hmm. And so you have exactly the same type of and percent of officers and enlisted men in a Sea Cadet group. And so this young lady was essentially the captain of this Sea Cadet group that we had, and so she dove overboard and rescued this kid that was thrown overboard because he was too close to the railing, and one of the big waves pushed him over.
And this is out in a storm?
This is in a storm off of
Washington?
Yeah, Washington.
And she jumped in and saved this kid.
She actually dove in, and she saved this kid, which was a Sea Cadet, I think he was a third-class seaman. And she got him over to the railing, and the other guys pulled both of them aboard. And
amazing.
So I'm just saying, she got a course of merit for this and everything. But the point is that Sea Cadets actually are not just wearing a Navy uniform, but aboard ship or aboard base. And we got them to Naval Air Station San Diego. We got them to every place. And they are introduced to whatever rank that they carry, and they stay with that individual, and they operate whatever it is that individual is doing. If it happens to be, say, a full lieutenant, and it's on the bridge, and your command of the bridge, you then act as commander of the bridge, not of the mission, because you got a captain and an admiral sometimes.
This is really extraordinary. This is a life-changing thing for these young people. Wow.
It's totally life-changing, and like nobody gets in trouble. Nobody gets bad grades in school. There's no requirement to go into the Navy, but these people that don't go into the Navy almost all get in professional positions, even if it was just a seaman third class that the kid was in. It's amazing the results of what happens to these young people. And all I'm saying is there are organizations which, yes, some of them go to private schools, but almost all of the ones that we had were in public schools.
Well, see, that's yeah. Go ahead.
I'm only saying that those children came out of different classes. They finished the year, and they had like straight A's.
Yeah, I believe it. Sure.
And they're taught navigation. They're taught aerodynamics. They're taught they're taught fields, technical fields, and they can go into that technical field with 3 years in the Sea Cadet. And I think, we don't talk about this, but there are organizations which are countering this ridiculous education system that we have all over the country.
But see, that's the great tragedy that bothers me the most, is the potential of so many of our young people, which is taken from them and completely erased by the system. And yet you're right, there are, it's like a plant. If you water it, it grows. If you don't water it,
that's right,
it dies. And that's very simple. So, great story. And thank you for that. That was excellent. Wow.
Okay, do we have a few minutes longer?
Yeah, we do. We've got plenty of time. We can talk about mesofield if you want, or UFOs in the documents, which would be in part 4, I guess, up there on my site. But whatever you'd like to talk about.
Okay. I'd like to talk about what's behind this, because let's go back and get back inside the secret think tank at Douglas.
Right.
Because that's where this document came from, okay? And this is like our Bible. And this document are the studies that we're participating in. Yes, it has sometime university research people, or maybe some of the operating Navy people in a naval test facility like out at China Lake. But the point is that the people who are being interviewed by Dr. Clipper or one of his people, they are addressing that university or that naval base individuals. They're addressing people who are not in the field, and they're exposing classified information to them because they are essentially carrying secret clearance. And so if it's, say, China Lake, that it would, most of those people would be addressing the laboratories at China Lake, which are all underground. And so then what you're doing is you're talking to a lead man, or you're talking to one of the engineering people, designers, whatever, and you're reviewing this subject, and you're trying to get them to get their opinion and their technical capability in the subject of propulsion. And so you have essentially experts who are talking to experts, okay?
Got it.
And then you have Elmer Wheaton or one of his people talking to them. And so this then gets documented. It all gets typed up. It's part of that program, or it's part of a new study that we're just getting started in. And so because we're discussing classified information, only classified people can be reviewed. Many of universities, not just Caltech, many of the universities around the country have have personnel operating in secret facilities, and many of them are already working on naval or Air Force or operational systems. So they're already into a military program. So you're getting their experience, you're presenting the information to them, and then you get a feedback from them. Okay, this feedback then gets documented in the think tank. It's all typed, and it's put together as part of an existing program or part of a new one that's been planned for. So this then essentially rings the bell of, say, 10 or 12 people in the tank to run with that information and then come up with a plausible method of propulsion.
Got it.
And so, like TRW, the tank was set up to where it was in compartments.
Okay.
So you then have this situation where there may be 2, and in some cases 3 separate groups thrusting in the same manner on the same type of mission or program.
Right.
And so now you've already gotten yourself past what we normally do for the regular program, which is do one concept and 2 trade-off studies, okay? So you come up with your best approach, and then to complete that program, you do it twice again if you're responsible for that program. So everything that we did in the tank was we did one proposal, then we stepped back and did 2 more ways of accomplishing that. This gave us the trade-off study, and and I sold that approach to NASA on the Apollo program. So the Apollo program then accepted that, and we used standard trade-offs. Everybody had to use them.
Very smart.
Okay.
Very smart.
So what you have then in the tank is that besides the normal 2 trade-off studies that you do, your group does, another group is addressing the same program or the same mission or the same type of propulsion. And they're going to do the 2 trade-offs too. So now we've got 6 approaches to this, which pretty well fixes the what-if problem and in your program. All I'm trying to say is this was a standard procedure that then was accepted at TRW, and they did the same thing. And then I sold it to Dr. Davis and Dr. Von Braun, and so the whole Apollo program went that way. And you have this problem, what if? And you address everything you're doing with what if. And it's not just from the standpoint, is it dangerous? You ask, okay, what can go wrong with the propulsion? This type of propulsion. And what I'm trying to say here is this is your normal operating method inside the secret think tank. Everybody's doing this. So you come out with an approach that essentially is being hit at least 3 times sometimes 6 times, and sometimes 9 times. Now you've really fixed
Yeah.
the what if on 1 or 2 of those approaches. And you've narrowed it down, this is the way we're going to go.
That's
then
really
we
smart.
Start funding,
Mm-hmm.
then we start to fund the laboratory effort, and then I'm trying to give you a sort of an outline of how you do this. And then you run over to Caltech or JPL, and you sit down with them, come up with what you've come up with, and review it with their top people. And then we sub out a contract to JPL or to Caltech to do a prototype. And what I'm trying to say is it's not just that you have to design something, but you have a procedure you're going to go through, which is has an extremely good chance to work, okay? Because you didn't just have one guy design it, and then they did all the drawings and everything, and they built one, and it didn't work. You've already eliminated the major portions of the thing that can go wrong. And so these programs then they have a high rate of success because of the way you run this.
Sure.
And so in this document here, we're talking about a couple of 3 dozen of different approaches, but they're not just for the same mission. They're for different types of vehicles for different missions. And so you have this thing where you're going to build it here. The vehicle is going to be real heavy, and it's going to have to take the lift-off loads, okay, and the gravitational loads.
Right.
And so immediately say, we'll assemble it on the moon.
How long has that, Bill, how long has that moon assembly mode been in? Are they using it now?
What's going on now, I can't say, okay? But I can say that on Mars, yes. The moon is a different problem. Now, let me try to explain it.
Now, this is interesting. Now, I don't want to push you where you don't want to go, or you can't go, so don't get that in mind. But you've just made 2 remarkable statements. Mars and the moon are 2 entirely different things. All right.
Okay. Now, first of all, something is wrong with the moon, because unlike anything else that our astronomers that have been able to find, it doesn't rotate. Okay? So,
Yeah.
So first of all, it's not a moon. And it's not a planet. It's not a planet. It's a vehicle. And it's a command center for a sizable number of different extraterrestrial civilizations. So when you land on the moon, yes, you get the finger and they tell you to leave because it's no trespassing. So you don't get to go inside the moon and down into all these facilities with all these people working. And your moon, of course, isn't your moon either. It's their moon. And it's not a moon, it's a command center. And it's orientated at your planet purposely. Otherwise, it would just, if it was a planet, it would rotate. The interesting thing about what we just said is that there are numbers. In fact, someplace in this document that we're looking at, we talk about other stars' moons. That particular star has planets, and those planets have moons. Some of those moons don't rotate either.
Oh.
Wow. What did you just say? They're just like your moon, which isn't your moon. It's parked there. And it's a command center for a region in the outer part of one of the arms of the Milky Way galaxy.
How interesting. Uh-huh.
And so this facility, we didn't go underground. We were allowed to go take pictures, pick up the rocks, drive around. We got the vehicle there, and we drove around, and we went to a number of different areas, and we were told, okay, you can do 2 or 3 after the first, and then you're to leave. So that's what we did, and we never went back.
We certainly did, yeah.
And so you got to ask the question, why didn't we go back to explore the moon? Oh, my gosh. Okay, and what's this thing you said that the moon doesn't rotate? Oh, my gosh. What are we saying here? Everything rotates. Any astronomer will tell you they all rotate. Well, maybe that's not quite right either, because we've found other stars close to us with planets that have moons that don't turn. Wow. Is somebody living on that planet too? Are they reptilians? Are they grays? Are they human?
Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh. What are we talking about here? What I'm trying to say is the public does not understand what has taken place and what's happening. They don't have a feel for reality because it's been kept from them. You're not allowed to know. And okay, I'll admit, inside the secret think tank were compartments. And you may not even know any of the people in there. One of the things that was handled was if there was going to be lunch on board in the facility, it would be 4 or 5 lunch periods. If you went out, you were not encouraged to associate with other people in other parts of a secret think tank, which is the same as TRW later. Incidentally, TRW, Ramo Wooldridge, they were, I didn't say this before, but they were not in the Douglas secret think tank, but they were both advisors. So here we have who started and who ran the largest space think tank on the planet, TRW system. Okay. That's the level of the secret think tank. And so those advisors who are working on ballistic missile systems too,
right,
were the people that put together Thompson, Ramo, Wooldridge on the space park, Redondo Beach. Okay? So, as I've said before, TRW had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of laboratories, major labs and subsystem labs. And you don't really have departments. You got laboratories. But here we are back in the secret think tank again, and now we're reviewing a document that came out of the secret think tank in the 50s. And we're reading about people all over the place, Germany, you name it, studying some sort of propulsion. What's this hang up with trying to make a rocket? Where do they come from? Why are you people doing all of this? What's going on? So what you have in this document is both the people that are working on programs that some of them may have nothing to do with what you've read here. Okay? Others, they wrote it. They submitted that data, and it went in, and Elmer Wheaton threw holy water on it. Okay? So you have people in the tank that are flying to every place on the planet where Admiral Riccoboni's guy delivered proposals, packages, to. Okay? And here we are now, 10 years later, and I'm working inside the secret think tank, and we've got all these guys on all the different programs, different methods. You got dozens and dozens and dozens of proposals here. And yes, a lot of it is nuclear, and a lot of it, some of it was for liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen, liquid rocket engine propulsion. But nobody was really even addressing that. That was just stuff that was left over. But the document then was put together from all of these different people in the tank doing their studies. And they're getting information from all of the top people around the planet, around the country, who had gotten a package 10 years earlier.
So you saw the result of your courier efforts with all this amazing data down the road, how it just grew and grew and grew. This must have been fascinating to see.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Because then later on, there's more of this stuff going on, orders of magnitude more over at TRW Systems in Redondo Beach. And that came, the people from the tank, some of them, we said, went to the RAND Corporation, but many of them later went to TRW and became lab directors at TRW. So this information, and some of the fellows went to Lockheed. Some of them went to the Skunk Works in Lockheed. In fact, the vice president of engineering went over there.
Well, you seeded the whole thing. That's pretty amazing. So let me do this. We got about 20 minutes left. Let's pull in some more of the ET UFO angles into this whole program. And we've talked about the Nordics and the secretaries at Douglas. Did you ever have contact? Now, your book is called Selected by Extraterrestrials. Did you have contact back in those days with anything off-planet that you knew about at the time directly? Were you a contactee? Let me put it that way, just in the traditional sense of the term.
Okay.
Now, this is for people who weren't listening to us long ago, because we've talked about this in the past, but I want to make sure that we revisit it, right? I think it's important.
Okay. I told you before what Elmer Wheaton would say in a conference in one of the meetings on the subject, and where I would step in and pull my documents out, go over to the chalkboard, I would type into or I'd write with the chalk 2 or 3 different things, and then I had the documentation with me, and I would go over it. And as I'm going over this particular concept or proposal, Elmer Wheaton, or maybe it would be the chief guy running it, would say, once again, Bill, you are addressing, wait a minute, you are addressing this entire proposal is just as if you are from someplace else. Even your documentation, you write it as if you are from someplace else. You do that all the time. What's that all about? Okay, that would come up dozens of times.
So
anyway,
this is fascinating, Bill, because these people looked at you as being obviously, respectfully, something different, something unusual. Your perspective from wherever it was coming from got their attention, and you had a different way of approaching problems.
Yes. Okay.
And that was observed. Yeah.
I had the same thing in the 3 times I worked for Lockheed. I had the same thing the one time that I worked for North American Aviation. I had the same thing for General Dynamics. Every place that I worked, I would go in because of some proposal that they wanted, and they wanted me to help them with that program. But I was always in a position to where I was giving a separate opinion. And the separate opinion frequently nullified their best concept. And yes, years later, after the Apollo program was over and my secretary left, she would drop stuff in my head, and I had the answer. Now, you say, I don't believe you either about that either, okay? But all I'm trying to say is, I can't answer to you how or why so many of these things took place the way they did. But it seemed to work. And with me, I would be kicked around from one side of engineering to the other with people telling me, Bill, you can't do that. And I would then come up with an approach. Yes, it was different than the contract. Okay? But I would come up with an approach that actually, with my trade-offs, I already did 2 trade-offs. I didn't even tell them about the trade-offs, but I did it, and I presented to them the best one. And we end up that did solve the problem, and it did it frequently. I made mistakes too. Everybody does. But the majority of what I came up with violated the contract and became a different way of accomplishing whatever they were trying to do. And I told you before that I also worked for the Navy inside of engineering over in Burbank at Lockheed. And Lockheed had this program to study the extraterrestrial vehicles in the ocean and in large lakes, and study the facilities that they had on the bottom, but the bottom was underground, the bottom. Okay? Very
now you just open another door here, and that's that we want to just confirm the fact that the oceans are absolutely no impediment to our visitors. It's just like another medium of atmosphere. They have underground facilities under the sea. They apparently have underground facilities all over the planet. We're being visited all the time, and they're very simple. They have cloaking so you don't see the devices, the ships, the craft. They're hardware. These are machines. Or you do, or they fly so fast that your eye doesn't acquire them. It's just too quick. That's another
Yes.
issue. And there are a lot of... Go ahead, Bill. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying, I forget what page it is in the book there, but I showed you the book. There is a photograph of a drilling machine, and it's an Air Force drilling machine.
Yeah. I know the one. Yeah.
Okay. And there's a whole lot of guys standing around it and on it. And so you can see the size of it. I mean,
It's huge, and that's from the 1970s. That picture, I believe, and or early 80s. And you'd say, well, why does a tunnel boring machine say USAF on it and have a USAF stars and bars logo on it? What's that about? Well,
yeah, very interesting, of course. And so, first of all, why are you drilling the holes?
uh-huh.
Why are you doing this? And good gosh, don't have the Air Force do it. What do they have to do with this? It's not their responsibility. So again, studies inside the secret think tank back at Douglas, the location and size of large caverns was another standard program.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't mentioned in this document that we're referring to here because we were talking propulsion. But the Navy did most of the studies of not just the ocean facilities for extraterrestrial vehicles or facilities, but the underground facilities in the United States.
Uh-huh.
Yet the Air Force is using their vehicle to drill the holes. The Navy used existing drilled holes that the extraterrestrials have built, and they're honeycombed all over the planet. And so many of Navy vehicles, small ones, have flown through those large ones, and at very high rate of speed. And wow.
Bill, let me ask you another question, a little different direction. What do you know about what's going on, and there's apparently a lot going on, in Antarctica?
Okay. Back in 23-24 time period.
1923-24?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
The civilians, mostly in Germany, which had been working with the young lady who got the information to design and build large transports and leave the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And Maria. And so...
Orsic.
Yeah. And so she, with her 143 people that were working with her, and all the young ladies too, they had been to Antarctica and visited the German facilities there.
Huh.
And this was like 24, 25. And so they had their own facilities there way before the war even started.
Mm-hmm.
And they were adjacent to actually Germany had two large caverns, and the reptilians primarily had two enormous caverns, and then there were 4 or 5 other smaller ones that other extraterrestrials had down there at Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
And the temperature underneath the ground and the lakes underneath the ground are like normal temperatures that we would have here in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, you have to go either down through several miles of ice, or easier, come in at ocean level in through tunnels to get into the caverns.
Uh-huh.
So
that whole continent right now is basically off limits. It's all classified and secure. You don't go down there messing around without permission. The U.S. is all over the place.
Okay, but even before the popular writing of Germany going down there, coming in from the east side and then later on from the opposite side, and doing all their research, there were already facilities being used down there. And so
we have to remember that that's not like the Arctic. The Antarctic is a continent. It's once you get under the ice, and it's not all that deep in places. In fact, there are wide open oases there of warm water lakes and hills, and I don't know that there's much vegetation, but the surface is not all ice. Once you get under the ice, it's just a landmass, and you tunnel in, and you might as well be anywhere on the planet. Doesn't matter. So there's a lot going on down there.
Yeah, and right after the war, the U.S. Navy put this massive group together to go down and clean the whole thing out.
Yeah, that was Admiral Byrd.
Yeah, Admiral Byrd, and he had been down there a number of times. He knew what was going on, and nobody would believe him. And so when they got down there, these UFOs came out of the ocean and started to shoot down our aircraft. And they had German swastikas and crosses on the vehicles. And so it got so bad because there was a number of major ships, not just small tugs and things, that were sunk. And a lot of men died. And so essentially that was the last mission of World War II, which was a complete loss. And we never went back. It's a little bit like going to the moon and never going back to the moon.
Interesting parallel. Yeah, sure.
But that's off limits too. And so Maria and her group were able to, the SS confiscated everything, and then it was decided by the SS that let Maria go ahead with her people because she was working with a different group of extraterrestrials, and maybe we'll see if they can go faster and go learn more. And if she does, we'll just take it over when we want to. So she then, after the war, went down there, and the vehicle that she designed and used to go to several of the closest stars planets here, not Alpha Centauri because that's got two suns and the radiation is no good there. But she went out there several times with other people, and some of them stayed on planets there. She came back and lived there for quite a period, and I guess the last information we have on her was shortly after the war was over. And so my understanding is that she never came back. She stayed out there.
Yeah, she went to Aldebaran. That's what some say.
Okay, that's probably correct. But the point is that there have been facilities that the extraterrestrials have used for thousands of years in Antarctica.
Right.
Okay, it's nothing new. It's not a new facility.
Well, I was told that maybe this is right or wrong, Bill, but we just have a couple minutes left, but the Germans, when they went down there, were actually given one of the underground facilities that was not being used, no longer needed, from the reptilians or whomever, that they didn't have to go down there and blast the whole thing out, build it with concrete. They were able to go in and use something that was already there. Does that resonate with you at all?
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. Yes, they didn't have to. There was no. It was just part of the agreement, and well, they didn't have any problem going down there. And of course, we've never gone back, and it's off limits, and it's your planet, but maybe it's not even your planet.
I would think that that's a credible statement. It may not be our planet, and we're messing it up.
Actually, again, I'll say it, and I've said it, I think, on this program twice. Even though this is not correct, you have to address the fact that this planet is nothing but a laboratory for other stars' extraterrestrial people. And it's not just a reptilian lab, because they have all their allies and all the people that are not even allies that are using this planet as a laboratory for their agendas. And we got a lot of people underground that are using it, and so it's just a lab that has being used. Now, we get to have a good time on the surface, but these other guys are underneath the ground here.
Right.
And like there's one cavern that's right under Los Angeles that's half of the state in the size of it.
Wow.
And I'll talk about that maybe later on.
Well, maybe in the next visit. I've heard there are I don't know which newspaper, maybe the LA Times, but there are stories, I think from the 30s, that people who were working in the Bel Air area reported sounds from deep in the ground, and there were allegedly tunnels found that were ancient, that went honeycombed under the Bel Air area, that no one really talked about much. But there are newspaper stories about those tunnels. You can find them online.
Okay, the tar pits on Wilshire Boulevard. There are entrances within 6 or 7 blocks from the tar pits.
Oh, you know so much, and if you listen to Bill carefully, you can hear him walking around carefully certain areas of inquiry that I'm asking him, and that's fascinating. He knows a lot. This has been a really remarkable visit. The first batch of documents, let me remind everyone, is up at Rense, and you can go there, take a look at them. Just look at Bill's name and guests, or look at the third political art section at the top of the homepage. You'll see a deep space picture, and there's a click here right there, so you can go look at the documents, read them, and understand that they go back. They're dated. You can see what their origin is, 1950s, and they refer to items going all the way back to the teens and the 20s. They're just extraordinary. You can see how we got to here, and where we are now is really far different than most people, most humans will ever even dream about. Bill, thank you very much. Go get some rest. That was a terrific presentation. We'll talk next time maybe about what's under L.A.
It's very interesting, really.
I'm sure it is.
Okay.
Thanks, Bill.
Again. I appreciate what you're doing. It's very important.
Couldn't do it without you. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.
Right. Good night.
Mr. William Tompkins. And it's a 3-hour tour de force, as you just heard. Hope you enjoy reading the documentation. There will be more, and we're very proud to be able to present it to you. We'll be back tomorrow night.